I'm Connor Rebush, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome you to our humble show. May it please the gods, I'm Connor Rebush, champion of Capua, and with me as always is Patrick Wyman. I call him the Shadow of Death, but that is Dr. Shadow of Death, the likes of you. Anyway, this is Heavy Hands. You might be able to tell two things. I'm a little sick, and I've been watching a lot of Spartacus Blood and Sand lately. But today...
Baller show. To those of our listeners who haven't watched it, it is awesome.
It's absolutely amazing. It's the greatest schlock you'll ever see. But speaking of gladiatorial combat... we had some memorable fights happen last week, and none of them more memorable than the battle between Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez for basically the unified, I think it was a total unification of the middleweight division's titles, except both men got to keep their respective titles. And after that, we're going to be getting on to the results of UFC Pittsburgh, and we are going to talk as briefly as possible about UFC Japan, UFC Saitama, UFC St. Preux versus Okami now, which is somehow more depressing than St. Preux Shogun 2. We're going to get to that only at the very end of the show. First, let's kick things off, a nice long discussion about all of the many interesting facets of Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez. First of all, Pat, you enjoyed the fight, I presume.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was everything we thought it could be as a boxing match.
Yeah.
And a fight.
Yeah, it really was. How do you feel about it overall? First things first, we probably do have to discuss the scoring. How did you score the fight?
I had it 115-113 Golovkin. Triple G. I had it 115-113 Triple G. And I really didn't see how... I guess I could see giving one more round to Canelo and making it a draw. I have a real hard time seeing a Canelo scorecard, much less the absolute drivel that Adelaide Bird turned in, the 118-110 Canelo card. That's insane.
Yeah, I have yet to rescore. I did come in with a Canelo card. I came up with 115-113. I think by my recollection, I gave him the first four rounds 8, 10, and 12. And I might change my mind on 8, maybe on 4 if I rewatch, but then I might also change my mind on rounds like 5 and round 11. There were a lot of close rounds, and I'm okay with people saying they don't think Canelo should have won. I'm okay with people saying they think Golovkin won. The idea that this was not a close fight and that either man was totally outclassed, it does kind of bother me. And I have seen a lot of that Canelo was being bullied. He was being thrown around the ring by Golovkin. He was exhausted from the beginning. Of course, ring generalship and aggression always come into this discussion, which people who know me know that I hate. But I think it was a close fight. I think both guys had a lot of great moments, and it kind of looked like I'm totally satisfied with a draw. I'll say that based on the fight that played out, because Golovkin heavily outlanded Canelo over the course of the bout, and basically every round but 2 he landed more jabs. But I think in all but 3 rounds Alvarez landed more power shots. I think you could probably say that like the 3 best shots of the fight might have been landed by Canelo in terms of cleanliness and power. Although it was Golovkin who I think staggered Canelo briefly, not the other way around. But it was a competitive fight. Both guys had their chances, and I think there were a lot of swing rounds that I personally cannot be upset at somebody who scored it like 2 or 3 rounds either way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the range of acceptable cards is something like 115-113 Canelo to 116-112 Golovkin. I think that's like, and that's the... In fights like this, I think it's important to establish what like the credible range is. I don't think there's any way you can get to like 116, 112 Canelo. Like there were too many rounds where Golovkin just clearly did more, I think, to get to that point. But I'm perfectly fine with a draw. I think that's a perfectly reasonable scorecard. I think 115, 113 Canelo is reasonable. Golovkin's sheer toughness absolutely helped him in the scoring of this, because what were really clean, hard, just shots that would have taken out just about anybody in boxing.
Shots that have taken out many other people, like the exact overhand right that put Amir Khan away. And Khan almost did the exact same movement with his body to like try and help absorb some of the impact, and yet Gennady Golovkin's knees didn't buckle and Amir Khan went out cold.
Yeah, it was shocking. I mean, I really thought Golovkin's chin won the fight for him. Like, nobody else could have fought Canelo precisely the way that he did and beat Canelo that way. I don't think anybody else has the toughness to do that. That's insane.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Triple G talked about not getting the big drama show that he wanted. He didn't get the action fight that he wanted. Personally, like he said he didn't think their styles meshed together well. I think they meshed together very well. I think you would always have a compelling fight between these two guys because Golovkin likes to come forward, keep his opponent against the ropes. Canelo, more so than probably anybody else Golovkin's ever faced, is comfortable with his back on the ropes and likes to counter against aggressive opponents. So it's like, they're especially because both guys are intelligent fighters, there was this really fascinating back and forth between each one trying to decide how to make his kind of fight work. I wouldn't say that either guy was totally successful in what he wanted to do in the fight, which is why I have a hard time saying that either guy was clearly the ring general. I mean, there were easily portions of that bout where Canelo was quite clearly letting himself stay on the ropes, was choosing to stay there. My guess is to get a rest, maybe to psych Golovkin out, get him to throw and waste some energy, which he didn't do a lot of. But I didn't feel like either man was just dictating the entirety of the fight. There was a lot of back and forth. And a lot of...
I disagree a little bit. I really do think that there were points where Canelo would have not wanted to be on the ropes and Golovkin kept him there.
Sure. Oh, yeah, there definitely were.
Yeah, so there... I mean, not a lot of, like, really clear... I do think that there were points where Canelo let himself stay there to do exactly what you pointed out. But I think there were also a lot of times when he would have preferred to be in open space boxing and Golovkin pretty much didn't let him. But with that said, I think we saw some of the limitations of Canelo's style here. And this is something you and I talked about before we started recording, but specifically that what Canelo had to do was when he came off the ropes, he had to attack. He had to get off the ropes, pivot, and then throw immediately and keep throwing to keep Golovkin backing up. Because when Golovkin pressured, Canelo would land a counter or two, but he could not stop the pressure. He could not dictate the fight when Golovkin was pressuring. And the way to take that away was to get after Golovkin and either stand his ground in the middle of the ring or to push Golovkin back. And Canelo did that in bursts. He did it really well. And every time he did it, he had success.
Yeah.
Like every time he managed to walk Golovkin down, every time he managed to stand his ground and turn it into a fight in the middle of the ring, it was his fight. Every time he got pressured, even if he landed some good shots, it was Golovkin's fight. That was the basic dynamic of it, even more shockingly than I thought it would be. And Golovkin, I thought, managed to fight his fight a little more than Canelo did.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the difficulty in scoring this one is in determining like how much weight do you give in a, say we have a swing round in which most of them looked like Golovkin would spend 2/3 to 3/4 of the round landing volume, but not usually landing great clean punches. We have to give a lot of credit to Canelo's defense off the ropes for that. It was very difficult to hit him clean, especially the right hand. I mean, Canelo half the time was waiting for Golovkin to throw the right hand to commit to it because that was his easiest way out, and he hit that same pivot and head roll to escape the right hand over and over, which I found to be impressive, that Golovkin really had a hard time corralling him in with that right hand. But keeping him on the ropes, he was absolutely landing his jabs. He was landing a lot of shots to the forehead. He was hitting the shoulders. Didn't hit the body very much at all. But I do think there's difficulty in saying, like, well, if Golovkin spends 2/3 of a round landing that kind of volume and Canelo gets off 4 or 5 really clean power punch counters, I can see a case for either guy winning that kind of round. One guy lands 15 punches and the other guy lands 30, but 5 of the guy's 15 punches are harder and cleaner.
Yeah, I mean, and there were a lot of those rounds.
Yeah.
There were a lot of them. And I do kind of wonder if I went back and rewatched it and rescored it with an eye on that, because I did rewatch it, but I wasn't scoring it the second time around.
Just enjoying it.
Yeah, how much I do kind of wonder how much that would change my perception. But with all of that said, I really think we kind of nailed the dynamics beforehand. I don't think we placed enough emphasis on where in the ring the fight was going to take place, but I think we got the volume thing, because that's exactly what you just pointed to there.
Yeah.
I said in my pre-fight breakdown when we were going over this that it was really going to come down to whether Golovkin could push the pace or not, because he was not going to land at the same percentage that Canelo did. He wasn't going to land as cleanly as Canelo did with his shots. Canelo's the more accurate puncher. He is a slicker guy when it comes to picking and choosing and placing his shots. So that meant that Golovkin was going to have to throw more, and he did. That he found ways to ensure that he was throwing more throughout the fight. So even though he was landing less, and he certainly wasn't landing as much cleanly, he was still competitive when it came to actual landed punches over the course of the fight, and significantly outlanded Canelo. That's what won him the fight. Was like, I thought that was the most impressive thing about Golovkin's performance. Was as good as he is at knocking guys out, here he was a process fighter. Like, he was doing what it took to win rounds, which was pressure and volume and be consistent with it. You know, like, I thought that was really impressive by him, because you could easily see how he could have gotten frustrated after eating some counters, get sucked into going shot for shot with Canelo. And that was just not a fight that he was going to win.
Yeah. I think if you're talking about this fight, like, you could critique each of the fighters on two different sides of the same coin. You could critique Golovkin's tactical choices in this fight. You could say that, like, I think he did a good job of, he was understandably wary of, like, throwing lots of power and giving Canelo clear chances to escape, but you definitely could argue that he could have thrown a lot more wide rights and left hooks to the body to keep Canelo in place and to hit him, because, you know, you get a guy with incredible head movement and upper body defense, you hit him to the body. That's just kind of how it works. And I think he threw, like, a half dozen body shots in this fight. It was a shockingly low number, perhaps because he was so concerned with the counters. Meanwhile, you could criticize, there's very little to criticize in Canelo's tactics. Like, his responses to everything were borderline perfect, very few glaring mistakes, but strategically, sitting with his back on the ropes and taking so much of so many rounds off to recover did put a dent in his scorecards. And I think probably is the main reason, like, people felt Golovkin sort of had his way in the middle of the fight. Even if he wasn't beating Canelo up, he was definitely getting more the kind of fight he wanted, and just sort of edging all around, as Canelo wasn't active enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing was that in those middle rounds, this was when Canelo came off the ropes early, when Golovkin pressured him, Canelo attacked.
Yeah.
And he attacked some more. And that did a really good job of taking those rounds for him and doing his best work, especially in terms of landing body shots. That's when the body shots were there for Canelo, was when he came off the ropes, pivoted, and immediately attacked. In the middle rounds, he didn't do a lot of that. And I kind of wonder what the last few rounds would have looked like if he'd managed to sneak in another half dozen or dozen good body shots immediately after coming off the ropes. And, like, that probably wouldn't have been enough to win those rounds for him, where there was a whole run that went to Golovkin. But it might have made those last few rounds look a lot different. You can't credit Golovkin's conditioning enough. The fact that he was able to take the kinds of body shots that he did and push the kind of pace that he did as a guy who's now getting into the latter half of his 30s is incredible.
I think, like, you also have to give credit to his defense. Like, he certainly, Canelo is the guy who gets all of the, you know, the defense brownie points for this fight, because, I mean, he put on a show with his defense. He made it fun to watch, in addition to being very hard to hit. But Canelo didn't land all of his counters. I mean, there were a lot of three-punch combinations he would throw that Golovkin would slip the first one, pull back, and block the body shot that finished it off. He was very defensively aware coming forward. It was only as he was throwing that Canelo was able to clip him with a hard counter, and I think that's why we got the fight we got. That Golovkin knew he could not afford to just throw reckless power shots with full commitment, because there was a risk. And so we got a really dicey tactical battle that I thought both guys got a chance to shine. And it just sucks that, for me, the material result is fine. I'm okay with a draw. I think this fight, many people would say that it felt like a draw. A lot of people would say it felt like Golovkin won all 12 rounds. And Adelaide Bird would say that Golovkin got 10, or Canelo won 10 of the rounds. But that one scorecard, even though it does not change the actual effect of the draw, is such a pain in the ass, because, as always with big fights in boxing these days, there is something to mar the result. There is some kind of suspicion of corruption or incompetence that just takes a shit all over it. And it sucks, because a draw is okay, but 118, 110 Canelo is not. I don't know. It just puts a kind of damper on it. It bums me out that this always happens, because the fight was so good. It was such a fun fight to watch.
Well, that's boxing. I mean, and frankly, that's part of the landscape of boxing, and so is having a bunch of loudmouths on social media like pushing a dramatically one-sided narrative of what happened. Like even more so than MMA. This happens in all of sports. It especially happens in combat sports where the results are tend to be so binary. But it's especially true of boxing that like, and this is frankly one of the things that keeps me away from being like a full-on boxing guy is how unpleasant the boxing social media echo chamber is.
It might be the worst online fan community. And I like a lot of people in the boxing community, and like honestly Sundays after a big card, going to Bad Left Hook and like just having like ridiculously long comment arguments and discussions, it's a thing that I enjoy. It's part of the Sunday experience when a big fight has happened. But there is an awful lot of people out there who would call the fact that this is a draw a robbery. Called like the very idea of it being 6 rounds to 6 is inconceivable. And personally, I don't see how you could look at this fight and not at least understand how someone could come up with a draw.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Like, so there's going to be a rematch.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? What would each guy need to do to make it more clearly their fight the second time around?
Both guys need to work the body more. I think Canelo needs to work the body with his jab more than anything else. I think that would be a very effective tool to allow him to stay off the ropes a little more, to do more of that center ring fighting that he was so effective with in this fight. He needs a long range weapon that Golovkin, who relies a lot on like getting his arms in the way to block. One of the hardest shots to do that for is a body jab. Without opening yourself up. So that's a good tool for him. Golovkin obviously needs to work the body more. A body jab will be great for him, but especially when he gets Canelo to the ropes again, that wide right to the body, man, just sit down on it. Because Canelo, one of the biggest criticisms you can make of him is that his counters are not fully tied into his footwork. He has good footwork, and it continues to get better, and especially in tight. You see a lot of nice little angles and turns. He does a lot of tricky shit, stuff that I think he started playing with after he fought Floyd and realized the possibilities of like slickster boxing, but he started to control people with his hands, control their heads, turn them inside. He does that really well, but he still does not really turn that into punching opportunities, or he does not capitalize on the opportunities created. There were so many times when he did that head roll and pivot away from the right hand. I'm like, just do a check hook while you do that. It will be perfect. It's the exact right counter. Or plant your feet as soon as you're done pivoting and come back with a straight right hand, something. But he doesn't do that very often. Yeah,
so exactly what you pointed to with Canelo there is what I would say. Like, that when he comes, and this is not just a tactical thing, it's also a strategic thing. You have got to attack when you get space to attack.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and the best time to do that is after Golovkin pressures, like the head roll and pivot away from the right hand that you pointed to. That's not just a tactical opening. That's a strategic one, because that marks the end of one particular phase of Golovkin's attack. That right there is your opening.
Yeah.
That's when you score. That's when you score points. That's when you land the body shots that you're going to need to try to slow Golovkin down as the fight goes on. That is your chance right there. Every single time he pressures and lets you off the ropes, you got to get right back on him and stay on him. And don't let him push you back. Like, that's the time to do it. Like, there's no scenario in which these two guys fight in which Golovkin doesn't push Canelo back. Right? Like, that's gonna happen. It's
in both of their styles that will guaranteed happen.
Exactly. But you can minimize the strategic downsides of that by punishing Golovkin, not as he comes in. I think this is a problem with a lot of guys who are facing a pressure fighter, is they think that they have to punish the guy as he comes in to dissuade him, or you have to punish him as you're along the cage in MMA or in the ropes in boxing. And I don't think that's actually true. I think you need to punish him after he does it, right? So you accept the fact that you've been pressured, you accept the fact that you have found yourself in this situation where you're in a disadvantageous spot with your back to the ropes or your back on the fence. Your first priority there isn't to punish the guy for putting you there. It's to get off.
Yeah.
And then once you get off, then you can punish him for making you do that. Because if you can immediately get away when you're pressured and punish the guy for having done it, it makes the guy think, what was the point of having done that in the first place? Rather than like drilling in a simple Pavlovian response of like, you pressure and I hit you with an uppercut. Like, you can play a little bit more with the strategic and tactical implications of punishing a guy.
Yeah, you catch him when he's resetting. You make the less exchange of that kind a little less desirable. I think the effect on Golovkin in that sense would be a lot less than on a lot of people. I think he would probably just find a way to start pressing forward again regardless. But that's how you turn Like, imagine this. Imagine Canelo had done that a half dozen times in this fight. In opportune rounds, he had spun off that right hand and come back with a clean straight right, or cracked Golovkin and sent him off balance with a left hook as he committed to his right hand. Mm-hmm. That might have been enough to turn this from the type of fight in which Golovkin was getting the fight he wanted without completely taking over into a fight in which Canelo was being slick and elusive and stealing the rounds. I mean, that could have been enough to steal those extra rounds because his defense was remarkable. It's just that you need something to outweigh all of those not particularly clean punches that Golovkin's landing while you're defending.
Exactly. And I mean, and I scored the fight for Golovkin. Like, I want to make that clear. I thought that Golovkin won the fight. Even though I'm fine with a draw and I can see a Canelo scorecard, I really do think Golovkin won. And I think the reason that Golovkin won is because Canelo couldn't put him off of his game that way. I think that's like, it's not so much about with a fighter like Golovkin, it's going to be real hard to convince him of anything. You know, like, it's hard to teach a guy like Golovkin lessons, somebody who's that tough, who's that well conditioned, who's that experienced and knows their game that well. Mm-hmm. Like, that you're not going to put him off the way that you might put off like a Rumble Johnson in MMA. You know, like, you're not going to teach dude.
You're not going to break Triple G.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So the people that you need to convince are the audience and the judges.
Yeah.
And the way that you do that is by taking the opportunities when you get them. And there were a lot of opportunities. And I think there were more that we could point to, but I think the getting off the ropes and immediately attacking one is just the most salient of those because it happened so many times.
It came up so many times. Like I said, that defense was so effective, that exact defensive move, but it never really turned into offense. I don't think there were any times I can remember that Canelo threw that check hook or came back with that right hand or what have you after getting that turn. He didn't hit Golovkin while he was resetting, and so the reset was really just like, it was just a reset. He didn't get punished for having to reset. He didn't get punished after the fact for missing his right hand, for daring to commit to something. I think, too, a big difficulty for Canelo is that he got tired in this fight. I don't like when people talk about exhaustion as like an explanation for why they scored the fight the way they did. Like, oh, he was so tired. To me, that doesn't matter unless you're being much less effective than the other guy, you know, like unless the other guy's still winning the rounds with his punches. But I think he does have a problem where, as much as I praise his offensive technique and everything, he tends to throw everything with power. And I think he's not a volume puncher. He's not much of a jabber. He likes to counter. But I think it would really help Canelo to be a more effective counterpuncher if he could do a little more to fill that space with relatively effortless volume. The Mike McCallum move that I always talk about, just kind of keeping a pawing jab out there, touching, feeling, making sure the other guy knows that you're ready to punch, that you're looking for openings, and you are actually creating those openings for yourself by doing that without wasting energy. Because a big problem in this fight for Canelo is that the only way he had to rest was to sit on the ropes, because he's not a great mover, and to rest he needed to let Golovkin do what he wanted to do. But then he couldn't... those exchanges were one-sided even though not much was happening. That's the problem. Like, if Canelo had also been touching Triple G with little popping jabs in those rope exchanges, again, they would have probably been pretty equal. But it's just not in his style, and that's going to be the difficulty for him, especially if Golovkin comes back in the rematch and really works that body. I think that is an opening for him that he has to know after this fight that he needs to capitalize on that when they meet again, probably in May.
Yeah, I'm entirely with that. I'm with all of that. I think that they're looking at a rematch, barring either guy landing the big fight-changing shot. I think that there's more room for Canelo to improve on his performance than there was for Golovkin. Though, as you mentioned, I think the body punching would be a big thing. But I'm not sure that Canelo, personality-wise, can do that. You know, we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, but like, we had both pegged Canelo as a boxer puncher, as somebody who's kind of a jack of all trades. But like, he really likes to counter. He really likes to sit back and does his best work when you come at him. And Connor, you put it best. You said, like, he can hide it, he can fake it and do all of the other stuff, but that's not where he's comfortable.
He's technical enough that he can fake any number of styles. And I think his background as a Mexican boxer, like being a ferocious combination puncher with blinding hand speed, also makes him very effective no matter what he wants to do. But when he's against somebody on his level, especially somebody with this aggressive style, he very, very quickly falls into the habit of counterpunching. It's pretty clear to me that that is what he likes doing best. And we've seen that. I mean, you can say that Golovkin, to me, that's a double-edged sword, because you can say Golovkin had his way with Canelo, but you can also say that, like, I don't know, was Austin Trout a phenomenal pressure fighter? Because one of the most memorable moments in that fight was Canelo landing a counter uppercut off the ropes. It's just something he likes to do. But that's going to be a gambit, like fighting off the ropes against Golovkin. He did a better job of it than anybody else I've ever seen, but still hard to win a fight that way. You know, you have to fight it pretty perfectly.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Is Canelo, by fighting against his personality a little bit, could make it a lot easier to win win a rematch. The question is whether he can overcome kind of his natural tendencies in order to do that. That's the most compelling thing about fights like this to me, is like when guys have to step outside themselves a little bit and make those kinds of choices about what kind of fighter they're going to be in order to overcome a particular stylistic matchup.
Yeah. And I think Canelo probably, like, I think he's a cerebral fighter, and his trainers are very intelligent. I think he's probably the kind of guy who would do better in a rematch compared to somebody like Triple G. Just having seen those openings once before probably does a lot for a counterpuncher when it comes to finding them the second time around. But, you know, we also haven't seen Canelo in a rematch, so I don't know. And Triple G, like, as much as he's been looking like he's faded for a while, I don't think he looked really slow or sluggish in this fight. He had a slow start, as he often has, but once he got going, I thought he looked pretty good. He looked a lot like the Triple G who beat Lemieux at the very least, and not like the guy who struggled with Danny Jacobs. So whether that's because Canelo was an easier matchup for him, or, in my opinion, I think Golovkin probably came in a little better shape. Either way, the rematch, it's hard to call. I'm going to go ahead and pick Canelo again because I picked him this time, and I thought I could argue that he did enough to win. But I just want to see it again. Like, the draw, I know the draw is disappointing to a lot of people, but the fight was so good. The exchanges were so electric, and watching somebody stand on the ropes and let Gennady Golovkin throw is pretty remarkable to me. And then watching Gennady Golovkin, like, knowing through those first 4 rounds, he's just waiting to turn on into that second gear, and seeing him do it and seeing how much it dramatically impacts the way that Canelo Alvarez has been fighting up to that point, how much it changes his game because he has to adjust. That kind of stuff is fascinating to watch. So I can't wait to see it again. I enjoyed the fight. I'm not going to let myself get too upset about the scorecards. I guess maybe that's easier for me, not being one of the people who thought Gennady Golovkin won all 13 rounds, including the walkout. But I liked the fight a lot, so I'm excited for the rematch. Yeah,
this is without being a Hagler-Hearns slugfest, this is about as good as really elite boxing gets, I think.
Yeah,
I mean, this was really, really, really good.
It was a better version of Ward Kovalev 1.
Yeah, much better, much more action-packed.
Yeah, and I liked that fight, but it was a much more entertaining version of that kind of fight, a tactical war.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you haven't seen this and you get an opportunity to, by all means, check it out. Yeah, it's a good fight. Both of these guys are really good. Boxing is really fun right now, guys.
This is elite boxing.
You should check it out.
Yeah, this is as good as boxing gets. If May Mack was your introduction to boxing for the first time, I hope you watched this fight. And if you didn't, maybe catch it next weekend when they replay it on HBO, because this is how good boxing gets. It gets this goddamn good. All right, that does it for segment 1. When we come back, we are going to move on to UFC Pittsburgh. Luke Rockhold made his long-awaited comeback, beat Dave Branch, but not without difficulty. A couple of other interesting results in that card, which was more or less action-packed throughout. A strong contrast to the undercard of Triple G Canelo, although there's no question which main event was more meaningful and more compelling. But we'll get to Rockhold, Branch, and the rest of UFC Pittsburgh after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, I got my drink filled up. I every time I fill up a drink, I think of that Black Eyed Peas song that I hate, where they say, "Fill up my drink, Mazel Tov, L'chaim." For some reason, there's like
such a fucking bizarre song. The fact that the Black Eyed Peas were, for a hot second, the most popular musical group on the planet Earth is one of those things where we're going to look back and be like, what the fuck were we thinking? What happened?
Like, I was thinking that when it was happening.
Yeah, I mean, I was not paying enough attention to pop culture to understand the sheer ubiquity of that nonsense, but here we are.
Let's get retarded, Pat. Let's talk about Rockhold versus Branch. We're back. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Luke Rockhold, David Branch. Last week, Pat, you said something that turned out, at least from my perspective, to be very prescient indeed. You said that Luke Rockhold is an Anthony Pettis type. And, yeah, it looked like it. He looked like an Anthony Pettis type in this fight. Not an easy comeback for Luke Rockhold. Branch fought against type to pressure Rockhold, and it worked really, really well for the first 3 or 4 minutes of the bout.
Yeah, that was not Branch's fight, and you could tell he was not especially comfortable with it.
His corner had to scream at him to come forward because he was so unused to it.
Yeah, but it worked.
Yeah.
It worked for the same reason that it worked when Michael Bisping got after Luke Rockhold a little bit. It worked for the same reason that it worked when Chris Weidman got after Luke Rockhold a little bit early in that fight. Weidman or Rockhold, like a couple of other guys who started fighting at almost exactly the same time back 2006, 2007, Anthony Pettis and Junior Dos Santos, is a hyper athlete. And like those other two guys, he got by all the way up to an extremely high level on fear of what he could do to his opponents when he got into a shot, with his counter right hook, with his clinch game, which is exceptionally nasty, with his counter wrestling and counter grappling game. So he made it hard for guys to. You had to pick your poison when you were going to fight him. Were you going to try to come after him and risk eating a counter or getting picked apart at range with kicks? Were you going to try to shoot on him and risk rolling into his front headlock or into his back take? Like, were you going to try and clinch him where his size and leverage made him an absolute beast? Well, it turns out that the solution for that is just to very calmly pressure him, and when he does something, to counter him. Like. Yeah. That's the solution. Just as that turned out to be the solution to Anthony Pettis' game and Junior Dos Santos' game. That on some basic level, these hyper athletes who were able to make their opponents fear them, they didn't have the fundamentals or the mindset to deal when somebody very calmly tries to pressure them.
Yeah, and we've always assumed that is tied to athletic talent. I think there is a strong case for that people who are like athletic freaks who can, all of the aspects of combat come really easily to them, really naturally. It's easy to imagine someone like a Luke Rockhold going into a gym, being way better than all the other white belts on like his first day training, and never really, depending on who's training him, never having to pick up a lot of those little interstitial pieces, because your average opponent in the gym is, not even going to be coming at you as hard as the guy in the ring. The guy in the ring has a lot more on the line, so it's a little easier to intimidate him. I think more now than ever, though, in MMA, we are seeing the level of, like, not just technique, but understanding of how the game is played. We are seeing that now reach a level where fighters are overcoming fear a lot more. It's a lot harder to imagine a 2006 style fighter, a year of the Showtime type of fighter, starting and finding great success today, because there's a lot more guys out there, I think, who would be willing to do something a little different, or who would train very specifically to know, like, all right, it's going to be scary, but I have to counter him. Like, game planning's better now than it probably ever has been.
I'll give you a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Mark Diakiese versus, what's that dude's name? Drakkar Klose.
Yeah.
That was
perfect
Mark
example.
Diakiese is exactly this kind of fighter, somebody who is an overwhelming physical talent with just tremendous gift, who's used to his opponents fearing him from the moment that they step in there, and they should fear him because he's fucking terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Like 2009 Luke Rockhold. If you watch his early fights, you see just how overwhelming he was. Or Anthony Pettis, like when he knocked out Danny Castillo, overwhelming, right? Like. Or Junior Dos Santos, the hand speed he showed when he knocked out Fabricio Verdum, terrifying, right? But now, when you're Mark Diakiese and you're in there with a tough, durable, well-rounded, aggressive guy like Drakkar Klose, Like, you're going to do some damage to him. You're going to hurt him. But, like, if you stay disciplined and you have good fundamentals, like, you can put in work. It may not be enough to win the fight, but the plan is there. So the ceiling for a guy with those kinds of physical gifts who doesn't have the underlying fundamentals or to make use of the varied kinds of game plans, like, the ceiling is lower now than it used to be.
Yeah, I think discipline is the key. Like, there's a lot of discipline in MMA. They're like the average UFC fighter is a pretty disciplined guy these days compared to who he was in 2006. Somebody who's really dedicated to perfecting the craft and to game planning for their opponents, to sticking to their strategy even under duress. That kind of shit works. Like, the eureka moment for opponents of people like Anthony Pettis or Luke Rockhold, or to take over to boxing, somebody like Gennady Golovkin, who is obviously very scary and puts fear into a lot of his opponents. The eureka moment is just to think, I can just do the right moves and they'll work. Like, the moves will save me. The techniques will save me. I don't have to worry about what he's going to do or how hard he hits or whatever. I just have to do the right moves. And if you fight correctly, you can give people like Luke Rockhold a lot of unexpected problems. So, I thought Rockhold looked terrifying on the ground as usual. His wrestling doesn't seem to have gone anywhere, and he looked really good in the clinch as well. Branch actually got outfought in the clinch, which led to the end of the fight. But as with Anthony Pettis, who also is like not as bad in the clinch as people say, and also is very tough and can come back and is very mentally durable, there are still those glaring holes that make it hard to count on that fighter going forward. Even though Rockhold won here, and he's not on that like 3-fight losing streak that Pettis had, this is a fight that kind of gives you pause, considering matchups between him and the rest of the elite at middleweight.
Yeah, maybe this is not a crushing loss, right? It's not a loss at all. And maybe Rockhold comes out the next time and he looks like he's managed to fix some of these things. But a win does not necessarily validate the underlying process that went into it. A win doesn't necessarily mean everything's fine and you've got nothing to worry about.
Right.
There is no reason for Luke Rockhold to be eating combination punches from Dave Branch. That should never happen. Now, Rockhold getting hit with a shot or two here or there, absolutely. That doesn't mean that there's some like incredible flaw in his game. But getting backed up easily,
yeah,
right there, bud.
Yeah, I have a cold, so I'm just slowly dying over here.
Oh, aren't we all? Easily getting backed up to the fence by Dave Branch and then getting teed off on, like, that's not something that should happen. And that's not an accident that it did. It happened because Rockhold made mistakes with his footwork, because his defense is really, really, really basic. Mm-hmm. You always pretty much know where Rockhold's head is going to be. And if you just throw combinations at him, you can catch him.
It's going to be straight up or down to the left and back. He's there or he's pulling. Those are his only real moves. Yes. Yeah. And like, just standing his ground would have been better, but it's not something he's comfortable with, because I think it psychs Luke Rockhold out when somebody coming forward instantly says to him, "I'm not afraid." And I think that forces him into a reevaluation stage. But then also, like, we talk a lot about the connective tissue. We talk a lot about the system of fighting techniques and how the ideal fighter usually has all of his techniques sort of flow together. They fit together in a cohesive way. And that is the most shocking thing in this fight that I noticed about Rockhold's striking, is that there are no interstitial pieces. He has that counter right hook. He's got a good straight left. It took him about 7 minutes of fighting before he threw the two together, to my recollection, before he threw a right hook and then a left straight, which to me seems like a counter that Rockhold should be throwing all the time, is to follow that.
Well, he's not really a combination puncher, period, because of the way that he throws those shots.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Go on.
It's a technical thing. Like, it's a fundamental flaw in the way that he throws his straight left and the way that he throws his right hand. He is not well set up to throw another shot after he's done throwing one. He
would sell out on that right hook counter, and whether it missed or landed, he was not in position to do something else. And Branch, just kept throwing.
Yeah, which also used to be true of Anthony Pettis.
Yeah.
To come back to the parallel that we drew earlier, Anthony Pettis also used to have a really hard time throwing more than one shot. Now Pettis is not a bad combination puncher, but it took him years and years and years of unlearning and relearning things to be able to throw multiple shots in a row. So this is I did not see anything in Rockhold's performance here that made me think like, oh yeah, this guy is obviously gonna win the title again.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me return to the argument that we had before Rockhold Bisping too, the yelling argument.
Our
that we
legendary, one of our greatest.
Yeah, but you were right about Rockhold. Like, so much of what he does well is really physical dominance. And you're right about the fundamental flaws in his game. And I kind of thought that at some point he would start to close those up. And to this point, we haven't seen much evidence of that. He's still going to win a lot of fights in this division because it's a division full of old fighters who are not really getting better without a ton of talent coming up. So guys are going to hang around for a long time. But I think when Rockhold wins fights now, it's not going to be because guys fear his striking. He may knock a few guys out, but I think it's going to be because he does stuff that he did in this fight, like getting into the clinch, mauling, taking guys down, and beating them up on the ground. Like, that's really where the gap in skills is evident. Mm-hmm. And so I think if and when he wins fights moving forward, that's going to be more how he does it than like catching somebody with a clean counter right hook and just putting them out cold.
Yeah, because I mean, he turned to that, I think, because the clinch, the grappling, obviously he's extremely technical on the ground, but also like that's the kind of phase you have body contact, you can impose your sense of physical superiority on the opponent. You can make them feel your athleticism. You can bring it to bear in every single move you make when you're holding on to the other guy. You can do that at range too. You can make it a problem if you have the technique to back it up. If you are comfortable and disciplined enough to throw several punches in a row, to stand your ground, to sit down, to take tight angles. But if you just expect the other guy to fear the implication of the violence you might do to him because you're such a physical freak, you're going to have problems against people on the level of Branch and above. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think, Rockhold's not done in my estimation, and I still hope he will make some of those improvements, but this fight did kind of seal the impression for me that he's not going to become the kind of fighter I want him to be, that he may be stuck in that Anthony Pettis territory. But we have more important fighters to talk about, Pat. We have future welterweight champion Mike Perry, who fought in the co-main event and knocked out a dude on very short notice.
It is really easy to make fun of Mike Perry for a variety of reasons, right? Like, it is not hard to make fun of Mike Perry. But honest to God, Mike Perry is one of the greatest talents in terms of what he's capable of doing that I've seen in the last half decade.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. The power, the athleticism, the speed, the durability, the ease with which he seems to pick up new techniques, like things that he has never shown before, that he's just like, oh yeah, of course I can do this thing that is not easy to do
like
at all.
This clinch game that's only existed for his last two fights.
Yeah, like it's fucking incredible, man. Like this dude, you can say what you want about him as a person and some of the choices that he's made in terms of things that he's put out there on social media, things that he said, but there's absolutely no denying Mike Perry's talent. If you deny Mike Perry's talent, like, you're just blind. I don't know what you're looking at. Like, this dude, I think he would have murdered Thiago Alves. Like, as long as he can take shots the way that he's taking them right now, and I assume that at some point his defense will probably improve, like, he is terrifying. Just terrifying.
Yeah, because it's not like he was winning this fight up to the point of the knockout, really. He wasn't losing it, but up to the point where he got that first clinch tie-up, he landed that first big elbow. Like, Reyes was doing most of the right things, at least, where that he was keeping it even and was stinging Perry on the way in, and then Perry just clubbed him with a right hand in the clinch, and Reyes fell down. Like, it did not matter that Reyes had the right idea in how to approach his opponent. Perry was the kind of guy where he couldn't afford to take one shot. He couldn't afford to take that one opening that Perry could capitalize on. And it's a scary prospect to face. I would say that, like, you could perhaps specify and say that Mike Perry is a phenomenal physical talent and that maybe he's not a very cerebral or thoughtful fighter, that probably he's always going to be outmaneuvered by people who have really good footwork and can stick him on the end of their shots, frustrate him rather than trying to stand toe-to-toe and fight with him. But, like, if you give him the kind of anything resembling the kind of fight he needs, he's a force, man. He has great timing, great power. He's incredibly durable. He does not get rattled whatsoever. He's pretty remarkable in that stead. He also came off pretty affably here, even though he is a lunatic. Like, he on my broadcast, he told the kids at home not to get tattoos in their faces until, quote unquote, "You're living your dream," and then he said, "I waited till I got here," which I'm not actually sure if that's true. I thought he had teardrop tattoos in his face already, but it is what it is. He's Mike Perry, man. He is a character, and love him or hate him, his fights are goddamn gangbusters, and he is always entertaining in the midst of them.
Platinum, baby.
Platinum. That's right. Gregor Gillespie, though, probably a guy with maybe a little more potential to advance through his division. Well, maybe not. Put on a great performance in a very exciting fight with Jason Gonzalez. What did you make of it?
Oh, boy. I thought this was a wild fight. This was just, that was nuts. It was absolutely crazy. I did not know that Gregor Gillespie had that kind of willingness to bang in there. And I didn't know that Jason Gonzalez had that kind of willingness to bang either. I'm not quite as sold on Gillespie over the long term. I think he's a really good fighter and a really good talent, and I think he'll probably at some point crack the top 10. But he's a little old.
Yeah, that was what I thought of as soon as I was saying it. He's like 30.
I think he's 32.
It does not say on Wikipedia. They're trying to hide it from us.
They are trying to hide it from us. I think he's a little older. And in any other division, I don't think that would be a big deal. But at lightweight, where it is stacked with elite talent from the very top to the very bottom, little things like that really matter a lot. You know, like if you lose a step physically when you're 34 or 35, like that's going to. There's no margin for error there when you're fighting the likes of Edson Barboza and Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson and whatnot. Like there's just no margin for error in a division that has guys like that in it.
Yeah, but like the pieces of the game, he's 30. I think 87 is what it says his birth year is.
Oh yeah, okay, so he's not as old as I thought he was.
But still, it's a time where it is definitely sink or swim. You don't have much left in your typical prime at that point. But stylistically, I think there's a lot to like about Gillespie. I mean, he's a smaller lightweight, and I think he makes that work for him really well because he's pretty tireless. He has a remarkably easy time of just continuing to push, especially tying up in these exhausting, stalled-out takedown attempts that he will just commit to and stick with for a minute and a half, 2 minutes at a time until he gets you down or turns it into another takedown.
He does a really good job of getting low.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something that we don't see enough of in MMA. Gonzalez, to his credit, saw that. I always thought Gonzalez was a pretty smart fighter. I always liked what I had seen from Gonzalez over the years. But Gonzalez did his very best of trying to stand Gillespie up with those high kicks, right? Of not letting him get low, which is a trick that I don't think we see enough in MMA. Like,
no,
I don't think we
move.
see enough of that. So, but yeah, so I thought, I do think Gillespie is really good, and I do think he'll go a long way because his wrestling talent is exceptional. He's a great guy when he can get on top. We saw his passes, we saw his submission game, and the willingness to bang will take you a long way.
And also his cage craft in the tie-ups. Like he made a really smart move when he was in mount at one point, and both guys were like he was in mount, and their bodies were parallel to the fence, which was very nearby. And Gillespie knew because Gonzalez had tried it with mixed success once before that he would try to get his feet to the fence so he could kick off and try to reverse that mount. And so then Gillespie switched to side control on the side of the cage to put his body between the fence and Gonzalez until he could get back to another controlling position and advance again. That kind of stuff that's a mark of experience you wouldn't expect from somebody with as little fighting time as Gillespie. And I will say, too, the takedowns you mentioned, those are great. Those are something that are, I think, in his back pocket in a lot of ways because he does such a great job of timing and changing levels. Paul Felder said from commentary. Felder did a good job, by the way. They may have picked the most Brian Stan-looking guy to replace Brian Stan. That may have been their criterion, but I thought he was pretty good. He seemed pretty natural. But he pointed out basically that Gillespie sort of knew that he could just get a takedown whenever he wanted to in the striking exchanges. And he kind of did that. He would just change levels. He would throw with Gonzalez, counter him with like 5 punches. And then when Gonzalez started to counter back, like trying to answer with an equally impressive combination, Gillespie would just change levels and hit his legs. But Gillespie's striking wasn't bad. It was very wild and reckless, but like he actually had some nice angles he was working as he was throwing his punches. He was taking little small steps back to adjust and keep himself lined up with his target without being totally open himself. And I think you could see that even though the exchanges looked really wild and uncontrolled, Gillespie came out on top in all of them but one. He landed the much better shots in all of them but one when both of them were trading punches, because he was actually he was hitting some nice little moves that you wouldn't, again, expect from a guy with this level of experience. So I think there are signs of great potential in Gillespie. Whether or not they'll manifest themselves remains to be seen, but there are signs that he has some real fighting talent in him. Final words for this segment. We'll try to do this one quickly. Kamaru Usman knocked out Sergio Moraes with a blistering right hand, the setup for which I loved because he took the southpaw stance to get an outside angle, then switched to orthodox and raked Moraes with the right hand as he was on the fence. And you could actually see Usman setting up that moment about 2 or 3 times before he finally found the right range to put Moraes down. What did you think of his performance?
I thought that it was... I'm trying to think of how to put this, because you can't avoid the fact that Moraes hit Usman with a bunch of shots.
With a lot of power shots.
Yeah, and so, but I'm struggling to think. I don't think that really speaks ill of Usman.
No, I think,
because I think Moraes is actually really fucking good at landing weird shots and landing with power. Like, Moraes is a shockingly good striker for a guy who where that's not his background and where he looks kind of janky and weird the way that he throws shots. But he's really good. He's really good at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't take that like it would be possible. I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to forestall a counter argument that says, well, Usman got hit with a bunch of shots from fucking Sergio Moraes.
No, I think it's a fair point to raise, but Moraes, like Zane and I were saying on the Vivisection last week, he's like one of the best bad fighters. Like, he does all these things that are not technically correct, but he knows exactly how he needs to do them to make them work. He trains with Andre Dida, who I think has a talent for that kind of thing, like producing wacky brawler types who are surprisingly good counterpunchers, especially.
So I took classes with Andre Dida
for
a little while. I took like 2-3 classes with him back in maybe 2011.
Cool.
I want to say.
What was your experience of his coaching style?
He doesn't speak a lot, or at least didn't then. He didn't speak a lot of English, but it was a lot of emphasis on feeling the shot and throwing back.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense when you watch the guys that he trains, like what you mentioned, the counter punching. It was a lot about anticipation, and feeling the right time to throw shots, which I didn't really get because it was 2011. It was probably a little too advanced for where I was at the time. Mm-hmm. I think I'd only been training for 6 or 8 months at that point. But it was really sharp, really technical, much more technical than I was used to getting at that point, to the point where, like I said, I don't think I really understood it. But I can see how that style works really well for athletic, durable, mean dudes.
Yeah.
Moraes is all of those things.
Yeah.
So, but I think this was, if we're to bring this back to Usman, this was what we needed to see from Usman.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, we needed to see, okay, yes, all of those years of drilling with Henry Hooft and the guys at the Black Zillions and now Combat Club. Yes, all of that is paying off. He's turning into the fighter that we thought he was going to turn into. Like, this might be the future champion in this division.
Yeah, it was also, I think it is worth pointing out that Usman probably didn't have to take as many shots as he did. I think he wanted to make a statement. I think he wanted to come out here and say, I need to vault myself into contention. The decisions aren't doing it. He was like, I'm going to take some punches, but I'm going to knock this dude out in the first round. That's what the whole performance sort of looked like to me. He clearly wanted a quick finish. So I don't have any real concerns. I mean, I'm sure Usman is probably not on par with a lot of the strikers in this division defensively, but he also doesn't really need to be to make his game effective. Remember, like, knocking people out in the first round is not his thing. He can clearly do it, and we know that now, and that's great, but he has a very deep and varied skill set and is also a phenomenal fucking athlete and very clearly one of the top contenders for future champion in this division.
Yeah, I will never forget, he doesn't write about MMA much anymore, but Coach Mike Reardon, who we interviewed back at the very beginning of our run on this show together almost 3 years ago, Coach Mike, who is a wrestling expert, was talking about Usman and said, like, the things that he can do in terms of finishing takedowns, like that he has like freakish Martian android strength was I think the term that he used. Like, Usman is one of the most physically gifted guys in this division.
Yeah.
And not in the like wildly explosive kind of way, though he is explosive, but he's so smooth and so strong and so effortless with the things that he does that it almost blinds you to how physically gifted he is.
Yeah. And since he is a little similar to this other guy who's making his claim for contention, I will say now that I think that Usman versus Covington would be an amazing fight. I actually think
that's a top contender fight.
Yeah.
Make that fight.
Yeah, why not? It would be a great matchup too, because both guys can match each other's wrestling. Both guys are better than you think on the feet. I think it would be a scrap. So, yeah, Usman is up there, man. He's one to watch. If you haven't been watching already, now you definitely should be. Let's take one more break. When we come back, we are going to talk for another hour and a half about UFC Saitama, UFC Japan. We have a special edition, extra long show for you guys. So, no, we're actually going to spend about 10 minutes probably on this card when we come back. We'll see you then.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands, day 14 of our UFC Japan breakdown. And I don't want to talk about these fights anymore, Pat. I think we should cut this segment down. I think we should edit it. I think we should remove all the stuff we just said and just keep these last 10 minutes in the show.
I would be fine if we just talked about none of this. We could just stop the show right now.
Okay.
We could stop it right now.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.
This has been Heavy Hands.
Maybe I should have you do the outro sometime. Yeah, it's
I'm good.
It's not a great card. It's in fact, it's a terrible card. It's one of the worst the UFC's put on in recent memory, with very few other contenders for that title. Not to say that there are not some highlights on this card that we will talk about. Obviously, the women's strawweight fight between Claudia Gadelha and Jessica Andrade, arguably a title eliminator, although one wonders whether they'll give either of these women a rematch very soon against Joanna Jędrzejczyk if she retains her title. We also have Gokhan Saki, K1 legend, making his debut at light heavyweight against Frank Waston, Enrique da Silva, one of my favorite fighters. And then we've got... Well, that's kind of the problem with this card. There are a few matchups that, quite a few matchups that will be perfectly fine filler for another card, but there is not enough weight to anything to anchor the card itself. And nowhere is that truer than in the main event, which was St. Preux versus Shogun 2, which is, of course, like 4 of the most depressing words that have ever been combined in the English language or any other language. And now is Oven St. Preux versus Yushin Okami, which is another similarly depressing collection of words. What do you make of this matchup, Pat?
Of St. Preux versus Okami? Do I have to make something of it?
What do you make or not make of this?
Yeah, I guess I'm glad that Okami is no longer cutting to welterweight, which was fucking insane. Yeah. I don't know how and why he did that. I think... the fact that this is the best that they could do on short notice tells us a great deal about the light heavyweight division and the state of these small cards in this era of the UFC. As a fight, I'm not sure there's really much worth discussing here. Like, I expect Okami to try and bull into the clinch and force St. Preux to the fence, where he's going to be outweighed by, I would guess, about 30 pounds. So good luck with that. Yeah, I'm not sure what else there is to say. I guess Okami could kind of grind it out and win a decision on volume and grinding if he can wear St. Preux down. But I expect it to be much more likely for St. Preux to just land an enormous shot and murder Okami.
Yeah. Although I think there's maybe a 50% chance that happens very quickly. And then maybe a 40% chance that nothing really happens. And then maybe a 10% chance something really interesting happens. It's a sad state of affairs when a somewhat predictable knockout is not any kind of reason to watch a card. But yeah, like I felt bad when you said that. Like Yushin Okami's not a garbage fighter, and he's definitely got a name that carries weight. He's done a lot of impressive things in this sport, but he's better than somebody else they could have pulled up for a light heavyweight short notice fight. He's at least got a name, but the fight itself is just like it's like worse than Mayweather McGregor. It's just like an empty void of no analysis. My brain can't enter this fight the way it would most others. So let's move on. Claudia Gadelha, Jessica Andrade. That's the fight that is the real main event on this card. It is a genuinely good and interesting fight. Let's actually talk for a few minutes about that one. Andrade got outclassed by Joanna Jędrzejczyk in her last fight. Absolutely outclassed, but I don't think there's any reason to think that she won't continue to develop as a strawweight contender. I think that was just a revelation of... That was sort of like Cejudo's first fight with Demetrius Johnson. You know, I hope it's an opportunity for her to be like, oh, that's how good it gets. Now I have to work really hard to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to forget. Andrade turns 26 after this fight. Like, she is only 25 years old. She's only been fighting as a pro for, I think, 5 years.
Since September of 2011.
Yeah, so 6 years she's been a professional fighter. She still has a ton of room to get better.
Yeah.
Gadelha is more like a finished product at this point, or very close to being a finished product.
She's in the fine-tuning stage.
Yeah, Gadelha is making small improvements at this point in her career. And those are still, I mean, she's as good as a fighter gets outside of Joanna Jędrzejczyk in this division.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised. I kind of expect Gadelha to go up to 125 because this weight cut just has to be brutal.
I think
I don't know
she
how
and Jędrzejczyk might both try to go up to 125. Wouldn't that be a heartbreaker for Claudia?
Oh my God. Yeah, that'd be terrible. Like, imagine Gadelha manages to win a decision from Valentina Shevchenko and becomes flyweight champion, and then just eats a 5-round beating from Joanna Jędrzejczyk, like the second of her career in a second weight class. Like,
it would be like Cormier moving up to heavyweight and Jones following him to take the title first.
Yeah, that would be.
It would be a heartbreaker, right?
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Claudia's not a lovable old dad like DC, but I still feel for her if that happens.
She's really good, man. Like, I
is.
really enjoy watching her, and she's gotten better in the last couple of years too. Like, since she left Nova União and has kind of built her own camp. I think she's made improvements. She's still more or less the same fighter she's always been in terms of what she does well. She does her best work when she can take you down and work on top. She's a good striker on the feet. She's a good counter puncher. She's got really tight triggers on her counters. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that will serve her well against Andrade, because if she's down to brawl with Andrade, I think that's Andrade's fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gadelha is probably technically sound enough to make that work, but I don't know that she's mentally fit for it. I don't know that she could stand with Andrade in a kind of fight where Andrade is allowed to throw bombs with reckless abandon and be satisfied that that means a chance to counter. I think she would back off if that happens or get hit. So I don't think that's the kind of fight that really suits her. Obviously, the jiu-jitsu and the wrestling are always advantages for Gadelha. Andrade is not an easy person to out-grapple, though, especially if you're trying to go strength for strength, like the battle to take her down. She can certainly be out-finessed, like she was when she fought and got submitted by Marion Renault from her guard. But if she gets top position, or if you are struggling to take her down, you have to use a lot of energy to do it usually. She's very strong. And I think that could pose a problem for Claudia unexpectedly when she can't get this fight to the ground as easily as she wants. And we know that that's the kind of fight that tends to tire her out, too. Which means that
if she's forced to do a lot of grinding in the clinch.
Yeah.
And Andrade is real good. Because this comes down to, thank you for joining us, Lucy. This really comes down to Andrade's. Okay. Sorry. Would you mind if we took it back a second?
We'll stop it. That's fine.
Hey, Goose! Get away from the goddamn window. Come over with me.
Should I leave this in the show?
Come here. Sit. Good girl.
Should I leave some of? Shouldn't I leave some of that in the show?
Yeah, you can hang with me. Yeah, you hang with me. Okay. All right. Sorry. So
shouldn't I leave some of that in the show, Pat? People hear you screaming, "God damn it, Goose!" at your dog.
It's
a humanizing moment.
She's been pretty good all morning, but there's a bulldog walking down the street right now that she saw, and the bulldog is on her patch of grass outside the house and peeing.
Fuck no.
And that's just like...
All right. Gadelha, Andrade, final pick.
Okay, well, so what I was going to say was...
Oh, sure.
That... Because Andrade is so short and so strong and has such strong hips, it's really hard to get low on her and get under her center of gravity. And especially for Gadelha, who likes to get a lot of takedowns from the clinch, it is not going to be easy for her to get Andrade down. She's going to have to go for a lot of leg attacks, and that is not really Gadelha's preferred mode of takedown.
Yeah, she likes the body locks, the trips.
So I think you're right. I think she's going to have a lot of trouble. And in a fight where she's forced to grind like that, that could wear on her cardio. I think the fact that it's 3 rounds is going to save her. I expect Gadelha to find ways to take the first and the second, but then to probably lose the third. So I expect Gadelha to take a decision, but I think it's going to be really fun. I think it'll be a high volume fight. There should be a lot of action where Gadelha just lands kind of the cleaner counters early, eventually manages to get a takedown, squeezes out some top control, and then kind of gets beat up a little bit in the third.
Yeah, because Andrade throws clubs. Do you not think there's any chance that Andrade also will slow down, using all of that strength to resist the grinding takedown attempts? I mean, she's got a similar frame to Gadelha, at least.
She's 3 inches shorter.
That's
true. When you're 5'4" versus 5'1" is even more significant than versus being, like 6 foot and 5'9".
How did she used to fight at bantamweight?
She was a little bull, man. Do you remember the way she used to just charge forward and just wing body shots?
Yeah, she was a maniac, but it doesn't seem like it should work because she doesn't seem like she's tiny for this division. Or like she's huge for this division. She's definitely I'm sure it's a pretty considerable cut because she's really heavily muscled, but it's a good size fit for her. It does kind of boggle the mind how she used to make bantamweight.
She took it. I had forgotten about this. She took a unanimous decision from Sarah Morris.
Yeah,
dominated her.
Yeah,
absolutely dominated her.
She beat Raquel Pennington once, didn't she?
She did beat Rocky Pennington. Yeah. It was a pretty close and kind of a controversial fight, if memory serves.
Yeah, but she had her moments as a bantamweight.
Yeah, that's wild, man. I mean, that's my pick is Gadelha. I do think Andrade could wear down, but I think it's less likely. I think Andrade just has that kind of... She's got pretty good cardio. She can fight late into the fight.
She didn't look tired. I mean, that's the big difference. She didn't have the same kind of fight as Gadelha against Jędrzejczyk, but she also didn't look really tired after being beaten up for 20 minutes. Going into the 5th, she was going for it. She still had the explosion in her. So, yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I think Gadelha probably will win 29-28, but I'm expecting that if Andrade can not get taken down and ragdolled, that she can really make something happen as this fight wears on, because I think Gadelha is going to have to work hard to get the fight she needs for a clear win.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's UFC Japan, or at least all of it that we feel up for talking about. Gennady Golovkin, Canelo Alvarez, Rockhold versus Branch. A lot of interesting things happened last weekend. And then the weekend after this card is UFC, or is it in 2 weeks?
It's in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, we have UFC 216. So next week, we're going to come back probably with some kind of topic-based show, probably with some questions, something interesting, a nice little rest from the combat sports schedule before we get back into it. And we'll see you then. Before we wrap up, Pat, anything coming out this week?
I have a new episode of Tides of History. It's an interview with Dr. Jennifer Raff, who is a professor of anthropology at the University of Kansas. She's also Julie Kedzie Sister, which is totally random. But anyway, Jennifer Raff is a specialist on ancient DNA and genomics and how you can reconstruct population histories and therefore things like migration based on DNA. So we had a really fascinating conversation. She's super cool. She's super smart. I think it was really interesting. If you're interested in how you can use science to do history to learn more about the human past, I think this will be of interest to you. It's one of my favorite interviews I've done. She's super cool.
Very cool. As for me, I have been wrestling with this damn Technique Speakeasy format for a while now, but I finally think I have it pinned down, and I'm going to come out with a video this week. The idea is to do a fairly quick, somewhat free-form recap of techniques that I found of interest in important fights, using freeze frames from those fights, but in a video form. That'll go up on the MMANation.com YouTube channel and also on Bloody Elbow, and you can find it on my Twitter, I'm sure, once it goes up. But I want to talk about Alvarez Golovkin, and I want to talk about the techniques, because, as I said, the disappointment for me
has been that this bullshit scorecard and to some people the dissatisfying draw has tarnished the impression of what was a truly phenomenal display of fighting skill and grit from both men. So I want to talk about that and look for that sometime in the middle of the week. Otherwise, don't know what else I'm doing. I think that's about it. Thank you guys for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. And if you came here for the finer points of face punching, wait. Damn it, our social media handles. Find Pat on Twitter at Patrick_Wyman. I am at Boxing Bush, that's BUSCH. Facebook.com/Patrick Wyman MMA. Facebook.com/Connor Rebush MMA. And that's about it. Check us out on Patreon, support us, bonus episodes, blah, blah, blah. We will see you guys next time. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been a Heavy Hands.